Poll after poll, country after country, decade after decade, the majority of people want inequality reduced. The majority of economists agree extreme inequality damages growth, health, and social cohesion. The data on what is happening has never been clearer. We have the knowledge, we have the consensus, we have the evidence. And yet, by every single measure, inequality is more extreme today than at any point in the last 100 years. That is not failure. That is a paradox. And a paradox doesn't solve itself. It has to be cracked open. Because there is something holding the gap in place that is more powerful than knowledge, more durable than political will, and more invisible than any law or tax code. It's not corruption. It's not capital flight. It's not even the revolving door. It's a belief. A belief so deeply embedded in the culture of modern economies that most people defend the very system destroying their chances without ever realizing that's what they're doing. Today, we crack the paradox open, and once you see what's inside, you won't be able to look at the gap the same way again. Here's the belief. If you work hard enough, you can make it. The American dream, the fair go, the meritocracy, different names in different countries, same operating assumption underneath. You might be at the bottom today, but the ladder is there, and anyone willing to climb it can reach the top. This belief does something very specific to how people relate to inequality. It makes them tolerate it. If the gap between rich and poor reflects effort, talent, and choices, then the gap is fair. And if the gap is fair, closing it starts to look like punishment for success, rather than justice for everyone else. Princeton sociologist Jennifer Hochschild studied this for decades. Her finding? Working-class Americans consistently overestimate social mobility. They believe the ladder is more accessible than the data shows it to be. And because they believe the ladder is real, they defend the system that built it. Here is the political consequence. In survey after survey, lower-income Americans oppose wealth taxes at higher rates than you would mathematically expect. Not because they benefit from the current system, but because they expect to benefit from it one day. Economists call this the prospect of upward mobility hypothesis, the poem effect. People don't vote their current position, they vote their expected future position. And if they believe they're temporarily on the way up, if the lottery ticket feels like it might still pay out, they vote to protect the rules at the top. The meritocracy belief isn't just a cultural comfort. It's the single most effective mechanism for maintaining inequality that has ever existed. Not because it's true, because enough people believe it is. And here's where the paradox gets brutal. Because the belief in mobility, the belief that makes inequality tolerable, is destroyed by inequality itself. Canadian economist Miles Korak spent years mapping the relationship between inequality and social mobility across countries. What he found became one of the most cited graphs in modern economics. It's called the Great Gatsby curve. The pattern is stark and consistent. The countries with the highest inequality, the US, the UK, Chile, also have the lowest intergenerational mobility. Children born poor in those countries are most likely to die poor. The countries with the lowest inequality, Denmark, Norway, Finland, have the highest mobility. Children born poor have the best chance of climbing.
In the Great Gatsby curve, it ranks countries in two dimensions. In one dimension, imagine ranking countries from the most equal to the least equal. And you could use any type of statistic associated with inequality. A common one is the so-called Gini coefficient. And if you rank countries, at least speaking here of the rich, relatively rich countries, the members of the OECD, you'd find that countries like Denmark, Norway, Finland are the most equal. And countries like the United Kingdom, Italy, and the United States are the most unequal. And then a bunch of countries in the middle, Japan, Germany, Canada, Australia, and many other countries, somewhere between those two poles.
The correlation isn't coincidence, it's causation. Here's the mechanism. In a low inequality society, the gap between a good education and a bad one is smaller. The gap between a safe neighborhood and an unsafe one is smaller. The gap between a stable home and an unstable one is smaller. In a high inequality society, every one of those gaps explodes. And because those gaps open early, in childhood before any individual choice has been made, the starting line determines the finish line far more than effort ever will. A child born in the bottom fifth of incomes in Denmark has roughly an 11.7% chance of reaching the top fifth as an adult. A child born in the bottom fifth of incomes in the United States, the country that built its entire identity on the idea that anyone can make it, has a 7.5% chance.
The idea of the American dream is that through your own energies, through your talents, you can become all that you can be in American society. You can lift yourself up by your bootstraps. And in some measure, for some people, J. Gatsby, the protagonist of F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1920s novel, encapsulates that. My reading of the novel, of course, is that in a cruel way, that book shows us not just the promise, but the perils of the American dream, and how inequality subverts that long-held belief and brings it into question.
The American dream is statistically more alive in Denmark than in America. That is the inequality paradox in its purest form. People accept the gap because they believe in the ladder. The gap destroys the ladder, and the destruction is invisible until it's too late. Before we go any further, here's the answer to the title question. No, inequality is not inevitable. We know this because it was fixed before. Between 1940 and 1980, the United States experienced what economists call the Great Compression, the most dramatic reduction in economic inequality in the history of any major developed economy. In 1928, the top 1% of earners captured 23.9% of all income. By 1944, that share had fallen to 11.3%. By 1970, it was still below 10%. The gap didn't just stop growing, it physically closed. For 30 years, the economy grew and the gains spread broadly. The middle class wasn't a side effect, it was the primary output. What caused it? Three forces operating simultaneously. Strong unions that gave workers real bargaining power. At the peak, more than a third of American private sector workers were organized. When the economy grew, labor had the tools to demand its share. Progressive tax architecture, top marginal rates above 70% for most of this period, not because they raised enormous revenue, but because they changed the incentive structure. If you couldn't keep 95 cents of every extra dollar anyway, you reinvested in your workforce instead of extracting from it. And a war economy that needed full deployment of human capital. When you need everyone, you pay everyone. These forces weren't permanent. They were dismantled one policy at a time, starting in the late 1970s. But they worked. The gap closed. The ladder was real. The mobility was measurable. Which means this isn't a question of whether it's possible. It's a question of whether the conditions that made it possible can be rebuilt. And that's where the modern economy throws a wrench into everything. The Great Compression happened in an economy built on factories, unions, and national markets. The economy we live in now runs on a completely different engine. In 1981, economist Sherwin Rosen published a paper called The Economics of Superstars. His argument? In markets where technology allows the best performer to serve an unlimited number of customers, the rewards stop distributing across the whole field and concentrate at the very top. In 1950, if you were the best accountant in your city, you could serve maybe a few hundred clients. The second best accountant served the next few hundred. Rewards spread across the profession. Today, the best accounting software serves 10 million users. The company that builds it captures nearly all the value. The second best captures almost none. This is winner-take-all economics. And technology didn't just accelerate it, it made it structural. Look at the platforms. Google processes 8.5 billion searches per day. Bing processes roughly 900 million. Not because Bing is dramatically worse, but because network effects mean everyone goes where everyone else already is. The winner takes the market is global. Amazon captures nearly 40% of all US e-commerce, not through government protection, through scale, data, and network effects that make the gap between first and second place nearly impossible to close. The same pattern repeats across social media, streaming, payments, and cloud computing. In the old economy, the spoils were spread across industries, geographies, and hundreds of thousands of competing firms. In the platform economy, they concentrate into a handful of companies and into the people who own them. Jeff Bezos added more wealth in a single year, 2020, than the GDP of New Zealand. This isn't a policy failure. It's the natural mathematics of the winner-take-all engine. And it means that even if you rebuilt every progressive policy from the Great Compression era, even if you restored the unions, raised the rates, closed the loopholes, you would be fighting a structural force that didn't exist the last time we fixed this. So here's the honest verdict. Inequality is not biologically inevitable. It is not a law of physics. The Great Compression proved that it can be reversed. But the window to reverse it operates on a clock, and the clock is running. Because inequality compounds, not just financially, socially, politically, and structurally. Financially, the longer wealth concentrates at the top, the faster it compounds. Larger portfolios get access to better deals, lower borrowing rates, and returns that smaller portfolios never see. The gap doesn't just persist, it accelerates. Politically, as wealth concentrates, so does political influence. The mechanisms that could reverse inequality, tax reform, antitrust enforcement, labor law, require political will. And political will is harder to build the more concentrated influence becomes. Each year, the window gets narrower. Structurally, as inequality rises, mobility falls. Gifted Gatsby curve children born into bottom quintiles lose access to the education, networks, and stability needed to climb. Human capital gets misallocated on a massive scale. The economy loses the talent it never developed. The gap makes itself permanent. The Great Compression worked because it happened early, before any of these feedback loops had fully calcified. We are no longer early. The inequality paradox has a clean answer now. People tolerate inequality because they believe the latter is real. The latter is least real precisely where inequality is highest. And the longer inequality runs, the less real the latter becomes. That is the paradox. That is what holds the system in place. Not corruption, not capital flight, not any single villain. A belief in mobility, in meritocracy, in the lottery ticket that survives long after the statistics have stopped supporting it. Is inequality inevitable? Not by nature. But the conditions that reversed it last time, broad labor power, progressive tax architecture, national markets with distributed competition, have been systematically dismantled. And the new engine running underneath, winner-take-all platform economics, creates concentration at a scale and speed that 1950s policy tools weren't designed to handle. So the honest answer is this: inequality is not inevitable, but reversing it now requires confronting forces that didn't exist the last time we did it. And the window gets smaller every year we spend arguing about whether the latter exists instead of building a new one. Here's what I want you to take into the comments. The Great Gatsby curve shows that the countries with the least inequality have the most mobility. The American dream is statistically more alive in Denmark than in America. So the question isn't whether we want a fair system. The question is, what are we actually willing to change to build one? Put your answer below. I read every comment, and they shape where we point the lens next. Next time, we leave the theory behind entirely. We go to New Zealand, a country ranked number 1 in the world for ease of doing business, the place where the official story is that everyone gets a fair go. And we show you what that actually looks like on the ground for the small business owners doing everything right, following every rule, and still getting crushed. If you want to see how the machine eats the little guy, don't look at Wall Street. Look at Main Street. I'll see you there.